Welcome to this week's Cattle Call. I'm Susan Littlefield on the Rural Radio Network. Kind of flat to boring. We're going to talk about what's going on in this market trade, the sideways that we've been seeing in the trade. Of course, we're waiting on the cash. We've got a cattle on feed report that comes out on Friday. So a lot of factors that are going to weigh in as Brad Kooima joins us. He is with Kooima Kooima Varilek out of Sioux Center, Iowa. And Brad, I think we do need to start there. You brought it up about sideways on this market, and we've been there for a month. It's kind of out of the norm, don't you think?
It's extremely uncharacteristic for cattle, Susan. Thanks for having me on, of course. The cattle market is more of a, up, down. They don't give you a lot of second chances. I always, think that different markets develop different kind of characteristics. Corn market would be one that wouldn't be unusual at all to make a big, slow, consolidation bottom or top. Cattle, more of a V top, V bottom. That's why, that action from last week again, where we made new highs and then had a big outside day reversal down and think, oh, well, maybe that's going to break it. And then the market comes crawling back. So generally speaking, most of the months here are toward the high side of this trading range here again that we've been stuck in. And volume, like yesterday, volume very light. And I would say today the volume is probably even lighter than yesterday. So I don't know what's, sidelining the trader, I suppose, is uncertainty. And maybe waiting on to see how good the cash is this week. We sure think it's going to be firmer. And some early indications are that. But I think the cattle and feed report has been marked on everyone's calendar all the way back since the last cattle and feed report. The worry here is just what's that placement number going to be? How big is it going to be? And not really anybody debating about whether it's going to be bigger. It's just how much bigger. And if you recall, Susan, January had a couple of us puzzled as to how in the world Iowa managed to place 10% more cattle and Nebraska 3% more cattle when your state was basically shut down for half of the month because of the weather in January. So now, as things shook loose here and had a very mild February, and it feels like we had a lot of placements. So I think there's a little anxiety maybe on the trader wants to get that past him before he gets too gutsy. So we'll see. The guess is about 106% on placements. We'll see what it comes out compared to that.
So having said that, are we going to look probably for cash to in earnest take place after that cattle on feed report?
You're pretty smart. Yeah, that would be a Packer ploy, I would guess. Let's hope it's bearish, so maybe we don't have to pay as much for cattle come Friday afternoon. Now, there has been a few little hints, though. There's been a little 186, very, very little trade that way. Mostly it's getting passed in the South, which 186 is basically what they traded at last week. One regional was bidding 302 in your neck of the woods yesterday afternoon, which is pretty good, better than it's been. So, I still think the early indications are that it looks to us that there's some meat sold out in front of this thing. The weather's milder earlier than normal. I think the Packers used up some of these slower weeks, a lot of these Packers do have to guarantee so many hours. So he may have to come after this thing just a little bit more than he'd like to. We'll see. Their margins are still probably in the red, but you know what? I've had my margins at the red and nobody else has cared about it either. So I'm not going to worry about it.
So you talk about having some of these buys out there. What are the freezer space looking like right now as we head into those warmer months?
That feels to us, and I'm going to give you a kind of a subjective answer because I don't know if I can give a great objective, hard and fast one. When you get those cold storage reports, it doesn't seem like there's anything that's terribly telling that we're backed way up or anything like that. But the sense we get on this business is that because of the general uncertainty over what happens with this inflation thing, how much disposable income do these people really have? Don't forget, we're getting far enough removed now from that COVID spending spree where they were throwing around money like it was Skittles, that day is over. So you might have a little more disciplined spending. So I think you've got a whole system, whether it's wholesale all the way out to the retailer, to the Costco's of the world, where they maybe are more hand to mouth because of that uncertainty. They probably haven't stuck their neck out as far as they might have, otherwise, with the last couple summers have been spectacular demand. I mean, right straight through it. It's unusually so. So I know that it's funny you ask it. I read a long, good article this morning. Trying to gauge that vibe. Is this consumer going to back up a little bit, given the fact that the paycheck isn't going as far as it did because of inflation? I think it's a real risk, at least in the steak cuts. It seems like the grind, like the hamburger stuff, hangs awfully good. The demand for that is actually really good yet right now. So those demand questions are good questions. They're over my pay grade. I'll give you my best shot, but when they're close bought, it actually has a chance to work in our favor, because then they have, that's still pretty good demand, and then they have to, chase a little bit. So I don't mean to make that sound like that's necessarily bearish. It's just something that I think that we have to be sensitive to.
Well, you talked earlier in the program about this whole sideways we've been for a month. Do we see that as we get closer to the end of this month, maybe it changing a bit? Or are we going to go to month 2 of sideways?
Yep. I tell you what, to me, it's more like it's like a spring, you coil, right? That's why the next move out of here is probably going to be a little more violent than it would have been. Seasonally, you would expect the next move to be a little lower. But seasonals haven't been terribly reliable the last while. So I got to think that at some point, you're even getting some of these moving average signals that the funds use. Sideways will do that to you too. So you're real close to starting to get some sell signals just out of that, and we know how important the funds are. The funds are still a net long, big chunk of longs in the life cattle particularly. So you can tell I'm just a little more cautious here at the moment. At least I hope you can. Long term, we've got a great supply side scenario here with the smallest cow herd since 1951, et cetera, et cetera. But we're almost built in a day either.
So cautious is kind of the thought as we move forward. I know the grain side of it, everything has been fluctuating so much, makes for hard to get some profitability when you're making feed purchases.
Right. But I think, I don't know, my perspective on that side of it is, for those of us that buy a lot of corn, this price level here is a lot better for the buyer than it has been. And I'm pretty aggressive here trying to take advantage of that. Typically, we get a little bit, it's too hot, wet, cold, dry, whatever, in the next 45 to 60 days as we go towards spring. Now, I know that there's some areas too where basis in your area, in fact, talking to our feed yard down in Wisner this morning, basis has improved to 12.15 over. So that shows some tightening. Also see these margins. Some people telling me that the ethanol grind, the margins there are at a record, look at crude oil. I guess I'd be dialed into being a little sensitive to paying attention to that maybe the corn has a little value here.
All right, we got to get through these snowstorms that are headed your way and my way in this next week, and we'll, I'm sure, raise some havoc with those feedlot cattle.
We'd sure take the moisture. I'd just as soon have rain, but depends on who you listen to. They're talking, we might get 12 to 15 inches up here in Northwest Iowa, but it won't last long. We'll take some moisture. That'd be good.
Very much so. What's the best way for folks to get a hold of you, Brad?
Well, I guess hit us up on our website, kkvtrading.com.
All right. Brad Kooima has been joining us this week. Quick reminder that commodity futures and options do involve a substantial risk of loss, not suitable to all investors. And that's this week's Cattle Call on the Rural Radio Network.